Hello there, good evening, and welcome to this Facebook Live session this evening. We're live streaming with my colleague, Ken Skates, who is the Welsh Government Cabinet Minister for Economy, Transport and Minister for North Wales as well. Welcome to all of you who are joining us, not only locally within the Bridgend area, but across South Wales and indeed right across Wales and elsewhere for this event. It's going to be, I think, very busy. I think the time will fly past because we've already had loads of questions being submitted on everything under the sun to do with Ken's portfolio. So just to remind you how we do this, it's on Facebook Live. You can put your comments in the box, the comments box below, and hopefully one of my colleagues will be trying to pass to me any questions that come through. We'll deal with as many as we can, but it is a live event. We might have too many. We've also had quite a few submitted in advance that we want to get through as well. But believe you me, they cover a huge area of topics. So we're going to do our best. It's going to be sort of like a conversation. It'll give Ken as well time to talk a little bit in some detail about some of these matters as well. Now, we've had questions so far on national questions on jobs, the economy, on transport, on buses, trains, planes, automobiles. We've had questions on how you balance economic growth alongside environmental and ecological considerations, how we deliver social justice, and so much more. But just before we get started, what I'm going to do is hand over to my colleague, Ken Skates, just to say hello to him. I assume he's speaking to us from North Wales, but it could be from Cardiff, I don't know. And Ken, just to say if you've got any words of introduction, particularly where we are currently with COVID hitting us, not only socially and health-wise, but also economically, and also facing in January that moment where one way or the other, we not only have left the EU, but we'll have transitioned out as well, either with a deal or without. How does it feel to you at the moment? Ken, over to you.
Be with you this evening and to discuss some really pressing issues. First of all, I'd like to say that as a local representative, you've done an incredible job in promoting your constituency and your constituents, the interests of citizens and businesses alike during this pandemic. The fact is that the Welsh Government has stepped in and supported and secured more than 106,000 jobs that could have been lost had it not been for Welsh Government support. And we've done that with most comprehensive and generous package of support for businesses and working people anywhere in the United Kingdom. So those jobs are secured for at least a year. And we've seen recently the unemployment statistics that show Wales has an unemployment rate of 1% less than the UK average. That, in real terms, is about 15,000 jobs that have been secured that otherwise might have been lost. But of course, we face in the coming months, as you've already outlined, some pretty huge hurdles to overcome. The economic impact of coronavirus, particularly with the end of, and then of course the ongoing negotiations which are causing uncertainty over Brexit. And you're absolutely right, Huw, to identify that as a major challenge. Unfortunately, businesses at the moment, many businesses don't have the bandwidth to be able to prepare for what might happen at the end of this year because their focus is, but there are some sectors that could face an absolutely dire future unless a free trade agreement is secured. We have to ensure that we end up with a good trade agreement for Wales, one that respects the fact that we have 10% of people in manufacturing businesses, and one and we've seen just how fragile that important sector is to the Welsh economy. In terms of ongoing support to ensure that we overcome coronavirus with minimal impact in terms of unemployment, we have just announced a third phase of the economic resilience and supporting businesses and working people during the pandemic. We'll provide bridges for businesses that face local restrictions, those waves, 3-week waves of local restrictions, and also ensure that businesses that can adapt and grow as we look to the recovery are able to do so by being turbocharged. And so we're going to be offering grants as well to businesses to adjust.
Okay, thanks, Ken. Thank you for those opening remarks there. And also, I have to say, for your engagement with the constituency as well. Now, you were mentioning bandwidth there in a different context, but I know your signal is weak. We're getting most of what you're saying, but not everything. So we're hoping this is going to work and you're going to be able to stay with us. Listen, I'm going to kick off with a direct question from Gareth from my stake. Now, I know that Gareth was heavily involved in as a union convener over many, many years. His question very much picks up on what you're saying. He said he's pleased to see that Welsh Government had written to 13,000 businesses receiving public funds during the coronavirus crisis, urging them to respect trade unions and calling for business owners to give trade unions access to recruit members and a TUC link to be shared to staff about how they can join a trade union. What Gareth asks is, how do you intend to push this, to monitor the response? And what about those business owners who we know there are some out there who will deny trade union recognition to their staff?
You're right, Huw. It's a really, really good question. And we have provided financial support to almost 500 businesses through the Economic Resilience Fund in the Bridgend County Borough area. And I think it's only right to expect the best deal back for workers. So every business in receipt of Welsh Government grant support is expected to sign up to the principles of our economic contract. That contract promotes good health and skills in the workplace. It promotes fair work, promotes sustainable growth. And I wrote to more than 13,000 businesses, as you've said, reminding them of the rights that workers have, and that workers have a right that as we see, be able to access a trade union representation if they wish to. It's all part of our new relationship with businesses, where we're developing a relationship that's based on collaboration rather than just coexistence. And the vast majority of businesses are incredibly responsible and have stepped up to the national mission to overcome coronavirus. But where businesses do not meet their grant conditions, we will seek to claw back funding. We have a review of the economic contract currently taking place. That's important because we want to make sure that we go on learning from the contract and that we share best practice. And we're also, because of some of the weaknesses in terms of the health and safety executive, in terms of their reach, their capacity to deal with coronavirus related inquiries, complaints and investigations, we've also within the Welsh Government set up on a social partnership basis involving trades unions and businesses, a health and safety work council to ensure that we are all working together to promote responsible business and fair work.
That's brilliant. And it is a massive thrust of the Welsh Government that there is ethics within business. And by the way, I join with you in saying some of the local companies, and it's the same across Wales, who've stepped up to the mark during the coronavirus. It's been incredible. In fact, I'll be coming back to one of them towards the end of this session, who have put a question forward, and it's from Ford's Bridgend, but I'll come back to that later. But they have been exemplary, many of them. But I think Gareth will welcome what you're saying about the need for all employers to recognise the good the trade unions do and to give them that recognition then in the workplace, because it's a big asset if you've got the workers on board with the mission of the company as well. Look, Ken, I'm going to turn to something entirely different. And this is from Jin, from Pencord, just down the road from here. And I know who Jim is because of the question he's asked. I'm guessing this is Jim, who is chair of a local town council in Pencord. He says he knows that after the Second World War, the nation invested in public services to kickstart the economy and gave rise to a successful mixed economy because of big decisions from visionary politicians. Now, he says, would you agree that investment in the public sector must play a significant part in regenerating the economy post-COVID? And if so, and this is where he's heading, would you agree that developing transport links across Wales has to be part of that, including the Pencord-Penprysg Bridge development and the railway crossing, allowing increased rail traffic to West Wales and the valleys? You could see where this was heading. What's your response to Jim, Ken?
Well, we have outlined across government a set of principles that we will work to in order to ensure that we develop a green and just and fair recovery for challenges in Stoke's head. Absolutely, we need to invest in the public sector, and we need to invest very heavily in particular in public transport, as you've suggested. And you couldn't have a better advocate for public transport in your community than your local member of the Senate. I mean, you and I are going to be meeting later this week with UK government for a well-tagged study that's now at stage 2. It's important because we're building up the case for investment, but rail infrastructure investment is still in the hands of UK government. And I recently published a letter which highlighted the fact that between 2001 and 2029, rail infrastructure will have been underfunded. It's a huge underfunding, vital infrastructure that supports working people. And so investment in rail infrastructure is going to be so too is but also rail. And in terms of buses, we're looking at utilising in the immediate term funding levers to have greater control over services, putting passengers first, not profit. And in the longer term, we're looking at utilising legislation. It's ready to go. And in the next Assembly term, we're going to be looking at progressing it. I think, if I may, Huw, in terms of one of the big opportunities that we have in a post-coronavirus existence, the rejuvenation of towns, smaller towns. We've already seen during the course of the pandemic, some smaller towns actually benefit in terms of increased footfall as people look to shop more locally, particularly market towns. And we've seen that city centres have been less populated, footfalls fallen quite substantially in city centres, but actually with the promotion of remote working and home working, it's entirely possible to steer more wealth-creating opportunities to towns that, let's face it, for many decades have felt left behind in the age of globalization as wealth and opportunity is being concentrated in mega cities. We can turn back that tide of jobs being lost to intensely urbanized centres and spread wealth more evenly across our communities. And we now have that town centre first approach being led by Hannah Blythen in government that is seeking to promote as many job opportunities as possible in towns around Wales.
I mean, that town centre approach has been really helpful, and we've seen it around our area. I'm sure others will have seen it in other parts of Wales as well. But one of the things that's been picked up by some people locally, and I think we've got questions that have come in from Denisha in the Ogmore Valley, Rod Shaw, who's a councillor up in the Garrow Valley, those questions about how you can get beyond the, if you like, the core town centres. So if we look at things such as, for example, the very welcome town centre regeneration funding, which in places like ours has tended to go to Maesteg and Porthcawl and Bridgend, but there are actually other smaller towns, often up in the valleys or in rural areas, that don't quite get the same focus. And there's been a similar thing, Ken, with the adaptation fund, specifically to do with COVID, which again has been brilliant, but it's tended to focus on businesses adapting within the immediate town centres rather than a little bit further out. So is there something going forward that we can do to look at more flexible approaches to make sure that the funding can go to those smaller high streets, smaller town centres, as well as the big ones, which often are the easiest ones, I think, perhaps for councils to package as well?
You're absolutely right, Huw. When I was talking about those towns that have often felt left behind during the course of globalization, I was referring primarily to smaller towns most distant from larger towns and cities. I live just outside of Rhiwabon up in North Wales, and Rhiwabon's a perfect example in terms of what you were just saying. People of Rhiwabon have not benefited from some of the major transformational funding regarding the COVID active travel measures. But Rhiwabon, because of a concerted effort by government at all levels, is seeing something of a rejuvenation through investment in housing within the centre, investing in the greening of the centre. And this is something that we want to see elsewhere, right across Wales. So with the town centre first approach, we're going to be looking at how we can touch smaller towns, not just the large ones. Of course, many large towns still need assistance, but we want to make sure that we invest where there is greatest market failure in terms of investment in buildings, in the environment, in job creation. And there's an important role for the public sector to play in this. I've taught that we utilize the public sector workforce to bring back vibrancy in small town centres, where we create remote working hubs that can be used by the private sector as well as by the public sector, but where the Welsh Government has a presence as well, encouraging people back into town centres that have really, really struggled in recent decades.
Yeah, brilliant. Look, Ken, as we're speaking, we got quite a few comments coming in, and we welcome all of these. One of them is from Tony, who says, bearing in mind some of the problems we're having tonight here on the channels with the broadband, he said, hopefully investment in broadband across all areas of Wales. Don't answer that yet, okay? Don't answer that. Charles Smith says, town centres have benefited greatly in Bridgend area from the Townscape Heritage Initiative grants and its successor. Could a similar scheme be considered for suburban and neighbourhood shopping areas, as well as some of the older commercial areas in the valleys? He's going at that same thing, which is we have had models before where it's focused it out to those other areas. And I think perhaps there's understandably in reaction to COVID been a real focus on the core town centres, but maybe now we need to be thinking, well, what about those others? Let me just pick up on a couple of others there. Let's have a look. Yeah, that's picked up by Rod, who put that question to you. It's about those secondary, tertiary centres. Now then, let me just turn to something else. This is quite interesting. Paul Waite, Ken. Paul Waite says, Mr. Skates, all of this government injection of funds is admirable. However, you haven't got a limitless money tree. So his question, and it'll lead us on to a couple of other ones here, which is, why continue wasting money on road building when at least 30% of the workforce are going to work from home, you say? Stop the road projects, invest in public transport, improve technology infrastructure, improve the environment. It's win-win-win. So Ken, stop building roads, Paul says.
Welcome the new Wales Transport Strategy, which sets out a new hierarchy for transport in Wales. It promotes first and foremost remote and home working where possible, and then active travel, and then public transport. You know, more than 100 million journeys taken by bus each year, and also rail transport, which is vitally important, particularly in the metro areas. They are also utilised by buses, and they're used for active travel. And so there's going to be a requirement to continue maintaining roads. There will be in some parts as well a requirement to improve the safety and resilience of our road network, because you can't operate a bus service. You cannot operate a bus service where you have high levels of congestion, where you have low levels of resilience. So it's about getting a balanced view, but I can assure you that that new hierarchy that's right at the heart of the Wales Transport Strategy will seek to rebalance not just investment, but also behaviours, because at the moment, too many people are choosing to use the car, partly because there's no other alternative, but also because it takes time to change behaviours. But we all have to do more, I believe, in order to contribute towards taking on the climate crisis and reducing levels of emissions in our communities right across Wales, in towns, in cities, and in rural areas as well. Of course, in rural areas, in many respects, the car is the only option. Huw, I know that we've had discussions on numerous occasions about the more remote areas of your constituency where, you know, it's simply not possible to use a bus in order to get to work. Either a service doesn't exist, or they arrive too late in the morning for people to commute to work, or they stop operating too early in the evening. We're going to take back more control over bus services, as I've already said, to make sure that passenger interests are put at the heart of service delivery, rather than have profit as the primary motive for having buses on our roads.
Ken, that's really welcome. And I think there's a lot of people looking with quite some excitement to the next Senedd term, because that combination that we've talked about numerous times about getting back control after the disaster of deregulation, but also then making the money that we put into transport go a lot further with bus transport, I think could be transformative. And if you couple that with universal ticketing, if you couple it with timetables that work together, so that we got buses linking to trains, linking to park and ride, whatever, but at the times people want it. And also, I have to say, as chair of the active travel group in the Assembly there, making sure that people can walk and cycle easily as well, up and down our areas across Bridgend, Pencord, etc. But also when they go to a city centre, can get off the train, get off the bus and get onto a bike, or pick up their bike, and they know there's safe cycle storage, all of this. We've got to make this work much more seamlessly.
And it's not a dream. You know, this is how integrated public transport systems operate in many other countries. And even in the UK, you can point to places like Liverpool, where you have, as you've identified, integrated ticketing and a fair ticketing regime. And we can do it in Wales. We've got the tools, we're going to be bringing forward legislation, but in the short term, whilst we're dealing with this pandemic, we're going to use the funding levers at our disposal to make sure that we get better control over services.
Okay, brilliant. Listen, just a note to Jim Hancock, who put that question. He didn't quite get your answer, but Jim, I can tell you that the Minister responded that we are meeting later this week, himself, myself, the local MP, plus the Undersecretary of State's office as well. So we're taking forward that issue so that we can hopefully resolve issues within the Pencord area and actually free up capacity on the main line along South Wales. That's part of getting more people onto it there. Ken, we've had a lot of questions on this issue of road building, specifically to do with one area not far from here. It's not in my patch, but it's not far from here. But a lot of people will know it. And I may as well, I've had 6 or 7 questions on it. I'll just use the one that's been put forward by Nigel from Coed Cadw. And he says, right, why are we putting £500 million into new roads when we're putting approximately £100 million into the dual climate nature crisis? So both the climate emergency we have and the ecological emergency. He argues we're going to be further destroying rich rare habitats like ancient woods within the Pendoilen route, but he also refers to the A55 in North Wales as well, Ken. So he says, look, on that basis that we're trying to get people off the roads, working more from or close to home, boosting the broadband network so we can do that, reducing the commute. How do we square this? Now, Ken, I think a lot of people watching this will say, well, there's not an easy, simple answer to this. But I would suggest we've got to be on a bit of a mission here of change, haven't we?
And we're on that mission. The Wales Transport Strategy, the new strategy, is designed to ensure that that change happens. But equally, as you said, we've got to be realistic about some parts of our road network requiring improved resilience and increased capacity. Some parts of the road network, not all parts, but in some instances, there is a requirement to upgrade our road infrastructure. That's where route was mentioned. That's a route in North Wales, which is going to be the spine of the metro, designed to ensure that we take traffic off the existing A494, the primary trunk road route in and out of Wales, so that we can operate bus rapid transport, dedicated bus corridors. Because unless we have dedicated bus corridors, we are not going to be able to get people out of their cars and onto public transport. And if you look at where the red route is, there is no option to build additional lanes up what's called Aston Hill. You have a huge concentration of housing on each side of that dual carriageway. People are being poisoned right now with nitrogen dioxide. We've already stepped in to bring the speed limit down to 50 miles an hour with cameras that are enforcing that. But the levels of nitrogen dioxide are still too high. I'd agree entirely, Nigel, that we have to make sure that as we face a biodiversity crisis, we do everything that we possibly can, not just to mitigate what might be lost when we invest in public transport infrastructure, but to go further and overcompensate for it. So again, just touching on the red route, the intentions there are to plant new forests that will be far in excess of what will be lost. And I take the point that it's ancient forestry, and everybody wishes to oppose, wherever possible, the loss of ancient forest. But the intention is to overplant and to build an entirely new section of forest in that area that won't just mitigate, but will overcompensate.
Okay, brilliant. I mean, look, sometimes there aren't easy answers to this. And I know one of the things that we've caused great controversy with was actually our decision on the M4 near Brynglas Tunnel. But Welsh Government have made it clear on that one that they're going with the Burns Report recommendations, which is all to do with actually shifting travel off onto more sustainable forms and releasing capacity rather than just building roads, which, as I know as a former UK MP, when I would travel out past the M25, you could build 6 lanes, 8 lanes, 12 lanes, and it would be like San Francisco there. So we got to find a clever way to get through this, but it's something that you're wrestling with day by day. Listen, just to pick up on, we've had some other people chipping in, Richard, on releasing capacity in the South Wales rail network. But I want to go on, Ken, to jobs issues. And I'm going to start with no apologies with a question from Andrew Pearson, who you may have met at some time because he's the Unite convener down at Ford's engine plant in Bridgend. And can I just say publicly, I just want to record my thanks for Andrew and his co-workers, who even when they were on furlough, actually went into work, used materials provided to them by Ford's, and they produced visors for local care homes and others within the area for free distribution. They did a tremendous job. But of course, Ford's now closed last week there. They've still got a skeleton crew on, but in effect, Ford's at Bridgend is no more. So he says, lots of workers at Ford's Bridgend engine plant were making plans for the future with hope of INEOS and the transferable skills they could use with the INEOS production. INEOS have pulled out, he says, no news on a viable option at Ford Bridgend site. So what do we do to replace the jobs for ex-Ford's workers in Bridgend, currently looking for jobs now and in the future? And of course, Ken, as you know, those were well-paid jobs, skilled jobs, and with apprenticeships coming through that were well, really good apprenticeships as well. So what's the update on what we can do post-Fords?
Well, I do know Andrew, and Andrew has been a superb convener at the Ford engine plant at Bridgend, and he's right that they're now down to a skeleton staff there at Bridgend of just over 100 members of staff. I think around 50 members of staff, highly skilled, staying with Ford but moving elsewhere. Several hundred people have identified and secured alternative work, which is really good news, and a significant number as well have taken our support in terms of starting their own businesses. We secured a £2 million R&D fund from Ford, and we're going to be administering that as Welsh Government, making sure that as much money as possible is secured by those people who have started up their businesses recently, who have all of the skills and experience and knowledge to be able to work within the automotive sector. But we're also going to be investing within the supply chain that's been affected by Ford's decision as well. I've got to say that the decision by INEOS was incredibly disappointing. We'd spent as a government, and you know, Huw, we'd spent a significant sum of money working to ensure that INEOS could utilise the Brocastle site at Bridgend. But as a result of their announcement, we now have a number of new inquiries for this very significant, large Welsh government-owned site. And so we're going to be looking at securing one or more of those opportunities, which could bring significant numbers of jobs. But we're not just relying on one or two golden projects to come to Wales and to be sited there. We're also investing in communities, in business startups. Business Wales are looking at how they can ensure that a hub in Bridgend is able to deliver opportunities for people that want to start their own enterprises. It's also about making sure that we invest in the community as well, so that the community feels vibrant at a time when there is good reason to feel very, very dismayed. And so a £1 million legacy fund is being created by Ford, and there have been, I believe, in excess of 170 applications for funding from various organisations. But at the outset, Huw, I said that the automotive sector faces cataclysm if we don't get a free trade agreement with the EU. There are a number of challenges for the global car market, which is increasingly becoming known as a mobility industry, including, of course, the fourth industrial revolution, including various transitions, whether it be to hybrid engines or straight to electric engines. This is presenting challenges. And so in order for the Welsh automotive sector to be in the best possible position to overcome these challenges and to exploit the opportunities that there will be, we have put together a manufacturing plan for Wales. It's out for consultation at the moment. If people want to take a look at it and offer their views on it, just Google manufacturing plan for Wales, Welsh Government. You'll get to the site, you'll be able to read the plan and offer your views. And as I say, there will be enormous opportunities. I'm sure you may have seen the news about the Memorandum of Understanding between the Welsh Government and British Volt. That's one of many projects that could come to fruition, generate significant employment opportunities, just as Aston Martin has created a very significant amount of work for highly skilled people. Aston Martin has made South Wales its home for electrification, and with that will come more jobs, more opportunities. We are constantly looking for projects that we can pull to Wales, but we are also developing what we call magnet projects that will bring investment, that are designed to meet the needs of industry and to showcase Wales as a centre of excellence for various specific areas of research, development and innovation. And Huw, the Global Centre for Rail Excellence, I think, is one of the best magnet projects that any UK region or nation has developed in recent years. And that would be a huge coup for Wales if we can deliver it. And we've got all of the partners in place. It's the only its kind with any viability. Government ready to dig it, we're going to bring ours as well.
I mean, that's incredible. And part of that doesn't come out of the blue. Part of that is because of the decision of Welsh Government to focus on projects like the Metro project and to take some ownership of public transport. That has given confidence to outsiders to say, well, actually, there's a government there that is serious, like we see in other nations where there is a state involvement within public transport. That gives confidence to say, we'll step in then, we'll bring our centre of excellence to you.
Absolutely. We've done it elsewhere, Huw. Through investment in the Advanced Manufacturing Research Centre in Broughton, up in North Wales. We are going to be able to capture what's called the wing of tomorrow for Airbus. That's going to be at the forefront of research and development and innovation for the aerospace sector, that particular facility, but it's going to be opened up to SMEs across all manufacturing subsectors as well, bringing together businesses that would not ordinarily work together in order to become more competitive and more productive.
That's brilliant. Look, you've partly dealt with a question that came up earlier in the chat box from Kyle from Monmouth, who was asking, look, basically, what areas of the Welsh economy do you really focus upon? Is it primary sector, service sector, manufacturing? I have to say, I'm very personally glad in Bridgend area, like your area up in Northeast Wales, is still very heavily reliant on manufacturing. I think we're the 6th biggest area in the UK down here on the Bridgend M4 strip in terms of manufacturing. You're similar up in Northeast Wales. But what about those other sectors, Ken? The service, the financial sector, all of those others. How do they fit in within this? And how do they fit within that South Wales corridor as well as throughout other parts of Wales?
So Huw, with what we're facing with coronavirus, we've got businesses in sectors that I think fall into three kind of categories. There are sectors and businesses that will go on surviving and hopefully thriving in spite of the challenges we face with coronavirus. By and large, that includes life sciences, thriving right now will continue to do so, facing significant challenge, but which will emerge from coronavirus and will continue to grow. So with that, I'd say the creative industries, where South Wales is increasingly becoming one of the best places to locate in terms of those sectors that will take more time to recover but do have a very bright future indeed, are some of our most important manufacturing subsectors. And I'm thinking about automotive and aerospace, those sectors that have to transition to a low carbon economy as well. But they do have a very strong future, but it requires a greater degree of research and innovation funding from central government, UK government, and it also requires, I believe, a greater degree of collaboration from partners that until recently may have been in competition. And that's Centre for Rail Excellence and the Compound Semiconductor Cluster to make sure we secure as many high-value manufacturing jobs as possible. 10% of people in Wales are employed by manufacturing businesses compared to 8% across the UK as a whole. It's vitally important to our future. And I know many people are sentimental about manufacturing based on our past, but actually manufacturing today in Wales is amongst some of the most advanced manufacturing business communities, and to look at what's happening with compound semiconductors to appreciate that Wales is at the forefront of much research and development. There are other sectors like cyber security that will become increasingly important as well, where we again have a great prominent position that we should be proud of. And then with sectors such as finance and professional services, we've had a really good story to tell about the growth of this particular sector in South Wales. Again, there is a very strong future for finance and professional services.
Brilliant, thanks, Ken. Now, Ken, my apologies, I'm going to nip sort of back and forth a bit as some of the comments come up within the boxes as well. I actually want to go on and talk to you in a moment about youth opportunities going forward and not replicating the mistakes of the 1980s here. But before I do that, because he'll have my guts for garters unless I put this in, and it's a very valid question. Simon Green, who I know well, and he's chair of the Bridgend Coalition of Disabled People. Yesterday he completed, in the chucking it down rain, a marathon as well. Well done, Simon. That is a heck of an achievement on top of all the other marathons and sports trials you've done over this year. But Simon says, with our transport conversation earlier on, Simon says, disabled access. Things are 100 times better than in 2003 when I became a wheelchair user, but they're still far from perfect. I can't travel on any bus and only a few trains with another wheelchair users, as they say they can only take one. It's just not accessible, and including for those with sensory impairments as well. As we develop the Metro, Ken, as we move to new fleets of buses, can we give any hope that there will be equal access for everybody, regardless of disability, that everybody can access public transport?
You know, Huw, social justice is hugely relevant in terms of planning transport systems and operating services. And just to touch back again on the Welsh Transport Strategy, the new strategy, social justice is right at its heart. Access for all is going to be an incredibly important feature on it. And yes, more needs to be done to ensure that people who are disabled or partially disabled, who have limited sight, people who have no option other than to get a train or a bus, who cannot drive themselves, have access and a space and facilities on board. And that's exactly why the Metro is being developed with access in mind, equal access for every individual, regardless of what your physical ability might be. So we're really, really passionate in government about this particular agenda because it is so important in terms of delivering that just and fair and equal recovery from coronavirus that we desperately, desperately wish to deliver.
And do you use people with lived experience of disability in bringing forward those proposals?
Absolutely, yeah. People with lived experience are vitally important in shaping transport interventions, but particularly investment in bus services, bus stations, and rail services. But equally, there is still a role here for UK government, bearing in mind that they still have some reserved powers in the field of transport.
Yep. Okay, thanks, Ken. Sorry about that skipping back and forth, but I want to make sure that we get lots of comments in as well. Now, I said we wanted to go on to young people. I'm older than you, Ken. I do remember the 1980s. I remember some lousy job creation and work opportunity schemes from youngsters that led nowhere, that basically were form-filling exercises with youngsters wasting their time with no skills being learned and so on. We could be facing, you know, some real hits on young people here now. It's not just what we see currently with youngsters going off to university, but it's youngsters who want to go into apprenticeships, who want to have good skills and training. And they see with some worry, jobs being laid off in retail, jobs being laid off here and there. We do have good stories to tell as well, but from a Welsh government perspective, what can we do differently to ensure that a young person in Wales has every opportunity of coming through this COVID downturn and coming out the other end with something worthwhile, with skills that they've learned and with some hope for getting to a good job going forward?
Well, Huw, we've already been tested in this area. It was in the aftermath of the 2008 financial crisis, and we developed a suite of schemes to ensure that young people had working opportunities, recognizing that young people were going to be left behind without direct intervention by Welsh government. So we developed as our flagship scheme, thousands of young people for long-term unemployment. In about 2015, I put together some stats, looked at what was happening across the UK and found that in some parts of England, after the financial crisis. It was between 2010 and 2015. Long-term unemployment in some communities, and particularly in the northwest of England, rocketed by more than 2,000%. Near me in Chester, it increased by 300%. And yet the rate in Wales increased far less. It did increase, but it increased far less, by about 60%. That is still a significant figure, but nowhere near the hundreds of percent that we saw across the border in England. And the important go on another training course or try to find their way in life. What it did was provided a positive pathway. And we set out, as part of this Senedd term, a target of 100,000 new apprenticeship opportunities. We're about to deliver on that target. As we look forward in addressing the challenges that young people will face when we begin to recover from coronavirus, we are not resting just on the UK government's Kickstart scheme. That Kickstart scheme is very similar to what Jobs Growth Wales has been to date, although there are some issues concerning Kickstart that I'm worried about. For example, a requirement that you are in receipt of universal credit before you can take an opportunity. We're looking at how we can add value to the Kickstart scheme to make sure that as many young people take advantage of it as possible, but equally that as many young people then progress from Kickstart in a positive way. We're going to be offering a young person's premium as well to businesses that take on people as part of the development grants that I talked about a little earlier, the £80 million development grants for businesses to adjust to a new economy. And Huw, I do remember the 1980s. I remember back in the early 1980s when the single history was announced in the community in which I lived, when Shotton Steelworks laid off in a single day more than 8,000 people. And I saw for years and years, in fact decades, the scarring effects of that announcement, particularly on young people. And we will not allow that to happen in Wales in the 21st century. And that's why we will be investing so much in young people, prioritising new job opportunities for young people. We'll be using £40 million of skills and employment support to make sure that we develop as many apprenticeship opportunities as possible. We will not allow young people to be left behind as we recover from coronavirus.
Thanks, Ken. And I know it must seem scary sometimes for younger people looking in on this and thinking, well, out there it looks worrying, everything they hear on the news and social media in terms of jobs and what, you know, the sort of dampening effect that COVID is having, and where we are generally with our nearest market with EU neighbours. But there is a note of encouragement here, because if you do have a state that believes in stepping up, a government that believes in stepping up genuinely and doing it cleverly, you can make a real difference. You absolutely can, and I've seen it. And it doesn't mean we won't have hits. It does not mean we won't have job losses. But you can step in and help people through this and get out the other side of it as well. And we have to give, surely we have to give people that hope we're going to do it. Look, I'm going to move on to something else. And it's this is from Jane in the text box. She says, I was really encouraged to hear the comments about trade union recognition and the decarbonisation agenda of Welsh Government. Can I ask, says Jane, that any public contracts issued using public money have to sign up to that decarbonisation agenda, and they have to follow Welsh Government ethical procurement policy, and this will be enforced. Now, comes to Ken, this idea of a partnership between government wanting to help and intervene in industry, but also saying to industry, well, you've got a part to play. Jane is saying, okay, but is this really going to happen?
Well, there's massive opportunity through procurement to extend the reach of the economic contract. And within the economic contract, there are only 4 points to it. We've made it deliberately clear and concise. One is that dedication to decarbonisation. And if we can apply the economic contract to public contracts, then there is a huge opportunity to further decarbonise in a way that many other governments practice, and they're speaking with us about the economic contract. Scottish Government, the Metro Mayor in Manchester, other governments are looking at how they may be able to develop similar interventions. And just, Huw, touching back on the point you were just making, for young people, skills development is vitally important. And one of the big success stories since devolution concerns qualifications and the skill set of the nation. And we've seen since devolution, the proportion of people without any qualifications more than half because of the investment that we've made and because of the determination of citizens in Wales to upskill, to gain qualifications. And we're going to be making sure that all of the action that's taken forward by Welsh Government to support young people, to ensure that they're not unemployed, will be linked to improving their skills and qualifications to make sure they get into sustainable, decent jobs.
And that's brilliant. Okay, let's get to some nitty-gritty things here. The time is flying past, but we've still got some questions to get through. Richard asks, how can Welsh Government make it easier to regenerate big, difficult sites? There's one of them here in my stake, but there'll be many across the country. One's particularly, Ken, that either have a brownfield site, or they need some element of cleaning up and decontamination. So they've got those additional costs. Yet often these sites would do that thing that Welsh Government says it wants to do, which is bringing jobs closer to home, less commuting, jobs up into valley areas, out into rural areas. But sometimes these sites cost a bit of money, and it's hard to pull. My experience has been trying to pull together different strands of government to say, right, you've got a bit of pot of money here, you've got a bit of money here, we can do this. Ken, is there some way, Richard, the thrust of Richard's question is, how do we make this easier and deliver Welsh Government aims of housing and better jobs closer to home on difficult sites like this?
Well, no two sites are the same, so you have to approach every single site with eyes wide open, and often with very deep pockets, because, as you say, decontamination efforts can be incredibly expensive. But what we found is that if you're going to have success in regenerating a site, you have to make sure that you're investing not just in decontamination, but in a future for the site, and make it an attractive investment proposition for the private sector, and ensure that you've got private sector partnership as well, rather than just take it forward as a private sector project in its own right or a public sector project in its own right. Having a partnership approach is often the best way forward. And that's certainly what we're finding with the site where the Global Centre for Rail Excellence is to be located. That will require a pretty significant regeneration program to ensure that we can deliver the test track facility. But by showcasing what we can offer to the private sector, we are able to then give the operators and the owners of that site a reason to invest in decontamination and regeneration. And the same can apply to sites where there's the potential to develop similar facilities, or, as you've highlighted, to build houses. And, again, we've got some fantastic sites. It's not beyond our ability to make sure that we turn neglected sites or sites that need regeneration into attractive investment propositions. We've done that across Wales for many years, and we'll go on doing that. But of course, some sites are becoming trickier. But as I've just demonstrated with the Global Centre for Rail Excellence, if you can identify another opportunity, another purpose for a site, you can attract the private sector funding that leads to it being a transformational program.
Brilliant. Ken, I got a last couple of questions because the hour has run away with us. But I'm going to ask this one first. This is from Paul. Now, I think this Paul is possibly from Ogmore Vale. And if it is, Paul, just thanks for all the work you're doing on public transport and promoting it, and buses and so on. Now, Paul asks, if this is the same Paul, is the metro still on track to be delivered in terms of the current timeline, or has it been hit in any way with the pandemic? And critically, Ken, thank you, Paul, for asking this. Is it likely the Maesteg to Cardiff line will see some improvements in terms of frequency to facilitate regeneration in the valleys? Thank you, Paul.
Thank you, Paul, indeed. And, you know, we wish to see that historic underinvestment in rail infrastructure addressed by the UK government. They've just announced a connectivity review, and they're going to focus specifically, I believe, on rail infrastructure in Wales. We're pushing constantly for the Maesteg to Cardiff line to be upgraded in a way that enables us to run turn up and go services, those important metro services. But there is a role for other forms of public transport to integrate in them. And that's why, you know, Huw and I have discussed this evening why we're so determined to invest in the future of bus services. And in terms of the time frame, broadly in line with our aspirations, we cannot allow metro delivery to be thrown off track significantly and also delivered in a timely way. Of course, there have been challenges in terms of planning, delivering, getting programs underway for Metro because of coronavirus, but the team that's leading on it, I think, have been incredible in ensuring that the impact of coronavirus has been minimal. They really have been heroic.
Well, that is really encouraging, because lots of things have been hit slightly off kilter because of COVID, including, you know, legislation within Welsh Government and the programme of government that we have. So it's really encouraging that the focus is still very much. But it's also, I mean, Ken, I got to say, because I know there's people on the line who are watching, not from South Wales. It's got to be West Wales, it's got to be North Wales projects as well, all around the place as well. Ken, I'm going to finish on this, and it's interesting because few comments have come in towards the end, and I got a lot of sympathy with this. One of them, Liam, who's a carer, said, you know, he's been in lockdown, seems for ages. He and his wife need a break away from family and a bit of life for themselves. He can't now go because he's in an area that I'm in with restricted measures. But it's been picked up by Richard and let's have a look. Richard and others here, Liam and others. That thing of, you know, I was supposed to have my 30th wedding anniversary. We were going to head off, instead of a little hut in Ireland where our honeymoon was, we were going to head off and have a honeymoon we never had in Italy back in May, and had to cancel it and everything. But everybody's going through this. But for people who have caring responsibilities and things like that, it's really hard. I guess the question is, Ken, it's how do we get that balance right between trying to clamp down on the virus re-emerging and actually allowing people to have something like a normal life as well? It seems like we're going to have to live with this for a long time. And so are our publicans and our brewers and our hospitality industry. But people who are looking just for a breather, a break, you know, they feel pressured now. Do we have any answer for them at the moment, or is the top priority, we got to bring that virus down first?
That's got to be the top priority, Huw. If we don't bring the restrictions are proportionate, but are designed primarily to deal with infection rates and infection numbers. And if they aren't applied in a proportionate way, if they don't succeed in reducing those virus transmission rates, then you end up with a scenario that we're seeing in Paris right now, where the restrictions are only getting tighter. And everybody needs that breathing space. The best way to get that breathing space is to get in and take action sooner, so that you shorten the period that restrictions are in place. But ultimately, in order to overcome rising numbers and to drive down infection rates, all citizens have to be part of a team effort. All businesses, government, we all have to ensure that we're doing what we can individually, but collectively as well. Coronavirus has been incredibly, incredibly difficult for people, for many, many people. I'm in a local restriction area as well up here in Wrexham County Borough. The numbers are rising. I know just how difficult it's been for elderly people, for young people who are missing out on life chances, whose first memories in some cases will be of the parents wearing face coverings, missing out on opportunities to socialize with friends, missing out on opportunities to see gran and granddad. This is a tragedy that goes beyond the loss of human life. People have lost emotional resilience, lost opportunities to celebrate important moments in their lives. But the only way that we are going to come through this is by showing responsibility for our own actions to one another and collectively as a nation. That's vitally important. And in terms of the restrictions that are in place, we are intervening as soon as the virus looks to be growing exponentially. And that is designed to make sure that we limit the amount of time that we then face those restrictions. And whilst we face those restrictions, we have in place measures to support business. And I think the First Minister has been so acutely aware of the damage that coronavirus is causing in terms of mental and emotional health, and the damage that it's causing to relationships. And that's why he's always been keen to stress that this just isn't just a public health crisis that concerns the physical impact of coronavirus, but it's also a public health crisis that affects the emotional and mental health concerns of citizens.
Ken, thanks very much. And look, we have run out of time, and I've got more questions that I haven't been able to ask on a range of different topics, but I've got to say we've covered loads, and we've tried to pick up a lot of the comments as well that have been coming through as well. I just want to thank everybody for watching this evening. We try and do these events in a way that it's a genuine conversation, and it deals with some of the difficulties around some of these policies and decisions, as well as, rather than just giving simple off the cuff responses. So Ken, really appreciate you engaging this evening. Thank you to everybody who's put questions in advance, the ones on the textbook. If you're wondering why my head has been bobbing about, it's because I got my pre-prepared questions that people are sending up here. I've got a WhatsApp going on down here. I've got an iPad running as well. We just about managed to do it, Ken, despite the broadband challenges. So I'll be having a word with Julie James to make sure that they sort out broadband wherever you are.
Yep, unfortunately, it's one of those areas of responsibility that the UK government still have mobile and broadband, but in which the Welsh government is stepping in to provide solutions. But of course, there is still that further reach that's required, including to my very own home.
It just goes to show that it's not true that politicians get absolutely everything done from them when they pick up the phone. Okay, that's brilliant. Listen, Ken, we wish you well. Thank you so much for the time this evening. I genuinely know how busy you are, but from a personal perspective as well, I just want to say thanks for being so engaging. I can say in all of the 15 years that I was an MP under different governments, I never had the opportunity to literally pick up the phone to a minister and say, look, we got an issue, can you help us? I've always had it, and I think that should be on record, because people will never know that when we have the job losses, they're public. When we save the jobs, it's because somebody has intervened behind the scenes. And long may that continue. But thanks, Ken, for all your work and your little team there as well. If you've enjoyed this, Ken, we might get you back sometime again.
Pleasure. Pleasure.
And finally, just thanks for everybody who's joined us as well. It's flown past absolutely. Sorry if we didn't get to your specific question. We tried to do as many as possible. If you want to post any more questions or comments in the box, do it. I'll try and get them answered, and join us for the next one as well. Ken, take care. All the best to you. See you during the week in the Senedd.
Take care, Huw. Thanks so much. Thanks, everybody.